Hi everyone, I'm Yuanyuan. I'm currently a research scientist in Australia's Governmental Agency for Scientific Research, the CSIRO. I'm also a postdoc supported through CNANT. I'm very happy today to talk about one piece of my CNANT work that is recently coming out in Nature Climate Change. The trade-off of carbon dioxide and methane emissions from global peatlands and or table drawdown. Before I dive into details of my study, I would like to express my deeper appreciation for the opportunities through CNET that not only allows me to learn new techniques, but also gave me a lot of help from colleagues across France and many other countries. When I talk to people about peatland, people frequently ask me the question, what's the difference between a peatland and a wetland? A peatland is a type of wetland with the accumulation of organic matter to a certain thickness. Countries may differ slightly in the exact number of the thickness of the organic matter nature, but no doubt, peatland is unique because of its peat. Peat is normally formed under waterlogged conditions. Due to lack of oxygen, the plant material decomposes very slowly and accumulates through thousands of years to form peat. Even though the global peatland covers only 3% of the Earth's total land surface, we can find many local peatlands across many countries across the world under the names such as fens, bogs, swamps, tundra, marshes, moors, etc. We care about peatland and it's critical in our climate system because of its high carbon density. The global peatland stores over 1/3 of our total soil carbon. That is more than twice of the biomass carbon across all the forests. It can also provide us a lot of ecological service. For example, it hosts a wide range of rare species that can be only found across peatlands. It can act as natural archives from which our climate scientists and also archaeologists can retrieve historical information about our human beings and our climate system. It can act to regulate flood, to purify water, etc. Unfortunately, many peatlands are facing the issue of water shortage. Here, the yellow line is the average or table depth reconstructed from a large number of peatlands across Europe. As you can see, there is a clear decline trend in all table depths after industrialization. These three panels separate those European peatlands into different regions. European peatlands are not unknown with regard to the issue of all table drawdown. Drivers behind peatland water shortage may differ for each individual peatland, but can be generally attributed to a regional drier climate or anthropogenic activities that drain peatland for a different purpose. For example, here for agriculture, to grow trees or to extract peat for heat. For those peatlands that rely heavily on groundwater, especially those coastal peatlands, overexploitation of the groundwater for irrigation, etc., also contribute to the water drawdown across those peatlands. The direct impact of water drawdown on peatlands people can feel is a loss of peat. Here I show a record from Florida, United States, a loss of peat more than 1 meter during the last 80 years. When it comes to the impact on greenhouse gas emissions, it's actually a complex issue because water affects different components of the ecosystem and different greenhouse gas species differently. There are small-scale studies argue for a source of greenhouse gas emissions due to water table drawdown because of the increased carbon dioxide emissions from organic matter decomposition. There are also people argue for a sink of greenhouse gas due to the increased vegetation growth after water table drawdown and also reduced methane emissions. To look into the impact of water table drawdown on greenhouse gas emissions across global peatlands, we studied water table manipulation experiments. From those experiments, we change only the water table depth and record the response for greenhouse gas emissions from those manipulations. We'll keep factors other than water table depths as close as possible. Some of the experiments are conducted in relatively well-controlled experiments, such as those so-called microcosm experiments. Some of the experiments are conducted in field conditions with the difference in water table depths formed either naturally, such as through the dams, or artificially, such as through human drainage. The difference between those two types of experiments are not statistically significant, so we put them together. We define the response of greenhouse gas emissions as the difference between the greenhouse gas emissions under high water table depths, that is with more water, versus that under low water table depths. We use the net effect from both carbon dioxide and methane as the net response. We built our database of water table manipulation experiments through extensive searching of the literature and also through personal communications. We first identified quite a large potential resources for our study and excluded some of the studies that didn't fall into our criteria. At last, we have a database with a record of 376 for that ecosystem exchange, more than 500 records for methane emissions, and around 400 records for ecosystem respiration, and around 200 records for gross primary production. Here is the map shows the distribution of our study site. Generally speaking, we did a good job to cover quite a large range of different peatland ecosystem. We are acknowledging we have very limited studies in tropical peatlands, especially those in African peatlands. I applied meta-analysis to assess the overall response through systematically weighting each of the individual studies. Under water table drawdown, the net response of greenhouse gas emission is positive and significant. By positive here, I mean an increase in the release of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. This positive response is caused by a strong positive response from carbon dioxide, outweighing the negative response from methane emissions. The strong response from carbon dioxide is caused by a strong response, the positive one from respiration, despite gross primary production acts to reduce the strong positive response from respiration. I applied different weighting schemes, and the overall pattern shows on the left-hand side is robust. I also separate the peatlands by region and compare Arctic temperate boreal versus the tropical peatland on the top panels, or coastal versus non-coastal peatlands on those bottom panels, using different weighting schemes. To study the drivers behind the response across peatlands, I applied machine learning techniques. Here is the random forest method. I searched through a large number of soil climate management and topographical factors that is relevant to my study, and selected those predictors that gives me the highest R-square and the lowest root mean square errors through the cross validation. Here I show the Yuanyuan out cross validation of my machine learning model. The top two panels shows the cross validation across all the samples. On the left for carbon dioxide, on right for methane. Overall, as you can see, the performance of the machine learning model is reasonable. The bottom two panels shows the cross validation for tropical samples. The performance of the tropical samples are comparable with that of the global samples, despite I don't have much observations in tropics. Here I show the response curve of the carbon dioxide in the top three panels and methane in the bottom three panels to the top three most important drivers. Each of the green line corresponds to one response curve from each of the individual experiments. The red line is the partial dependent plot. You can take it as an average across all the green lines. For carbon dioxide, as you can see, there will be a strong response of carbon dioxide release into the atmosphere if the ecosystem is initially a strong carbon sink, or if we have a big change in water table depth, or the ecosystem has an initial shallow water table depth before water table drawdown. We will see a strong response of the reduction of methane emissions if the ecosystem is a strong methane source before water table drawdown, or if I have a strong change in water table depth. Despite no overall pattern, as you can see, each of the individual response curve is slightly different due to the difference among peatlands. Here I show the response curve of carbon dioxide to some less important predictors. Similarly, here is a response curve of methane emissions to predictors other than the top 3 most important ones. I could also look into the interaction of different predictors and how their interaction affects my greenhouse gas emissions, or look into the regional response. I collected data sets that estimate the future changes in my driving variables. By future, I mean around the year 2100. So with the future changes in driving variables and my machine learning model, I made a prediction on how water table drawdown affect future greenhouse gas emissions. I combined different data sets of those driving variables and different machine learning model generated through the level 1 outcross validation. I made an ensemble prediction with quite a large number of ensemble members. Here I show the spatial distribution of future greenhouse gas emissions due to water table drawdown on both high and low emission scenarios. On both scenarios, the tropical and high latitude regions contribute to most of the emissions. Note here, by different emission scenarios, I take into account the direct impact of climate on greenhouse gas emissions on the water table drawdown, but may not be adequate in represent the climate impact on water table change due to the large uncertainties of future water consumption. From these machine learning exercises, I find this method is actually quite helpful for my study to capture nonlinear and complex interactions. But at the same time, I ran into the risk of overfitting, as machine learning methods are generally data intensive. So I put a lot of efforts, try to enlarge my data coverage and test on pseudo data sets, as well as prove from different angles that my predictions are robust. So while I'm working on this project, I actually learned there are quite a lot of peatland restoration projects across different countries. It's really very encouraging. It's certainly very important for us to act together to protect those pristine peatlands and to restore those damaged peatlands. I listed here some of the reference on the topic of peatlands. If you would like to learn more, please have a check. Actually, quite a few are really brand new studies. I list here a news report we wrote for our studies. I also list 2 other news readings that is relevant to peatland restoration. I found it's quite interesting to read. Both of those 2 readings, they have a short video. That's all from my part. Thanks a lot for your time.